You're listening to a podcast by Way Collective, a contemplative community for love and liberation in Santa Barbara, California. This podcast was our conversation starter at our dinner and dialogue gathering on September 25th, 2024. Thanks for tuning in. Well, here we are in week 3 of these conversations, Medicine for This Moment, where we are looking at how to stay compassionately connected during a divisive election season. The first week, we looked at the nature of compassion as not just feeling the feelings of another person, but also moving toward them with a healing and restorative touch. Then last week, we talked about how, despite the punitiveness and political disgust that exists in our time, we are invited to live unafraid, always moving to choose the way of love in any instance that we can. And so tonight I want to chat with you all a bit about what it looks like to make that choice to commit to the way of love, which is also the way of interconnectedness, in a time where it seems so counterintuitive to do so. It's normal that when we experience conflict, which could even be simply the conflict of another opinion, it's normal to want to either get into a wrestling match or to run the other direction. We all know our basic human biology well enough to know that fight or flight is our default response. I remember when I was undergoing my own process of deconstruction, and along the way there were these times where I thought it would be good to tell other people about my newfound insights, and the places where their perspectives were clearly wrong, or perhaps no longer valid for me given what I had discovered. And boy, did this not go well. I remember one time I got into a back and forth with a friend of mine about whether or not Satan or demons were actual spiritual beings or names that we give to certain accusatory forces in our psyche. So here's what happened, and here's what I learned. During that conversation, I was trying to make points about this or that, using logic or rational thinking in order to prove my point. Well, this couldn't possibly be true because of X, Y, or Z, right? And he was saying, well, what you're saying can't possibly be true because I have experienced demonic forces, and no amount of you proving your point is going to convince me otherwise. So what you're saying couldn't possibly be true because I have experienced it. And at the time, I was kind of thrown by this. I was like, well, I guess so-and-so just doesn't want to hear the voice of reason. But then years later, I read a psychologist named Jonathan Haidt, who shows us from the field of moral psychology that there's an elephant and a rider in our brain. The elephant being intuition, which are these automatic processes, including emotion and intuition and all forms of seeing that, quote unquote, meaning I see or I feel or I have experienced that this is true. And the rider being controlled processes, including reasoning why, meaning I can rationally tell you why something is the way it is. And he says that if you want to change someone's mind about a moral or political issue, you've got to talk to the elephant first, which are those automatic processes in the mind, not the controlled processes. He says if you ask people to believe something that violates their intuitions, they will devote their efforts to finding an escape hatch, a reason to doubt your argument or conclusion, and they will almost always succeed. Aha! So what I learned from experiences like the one I told you about is that if we really care about folks who see the world differently than us, then the strategy of trying to convince them that they're wrong on any topic, religious, political, moral, or otherwise, by proving it to them is dead in the water. And what creates inroads to connection and sustaining relationships with people with whom we differ is actually connecting with their emotive processes. Relationships with others who see the world differently can only be cultivated from inside their experience and their moral matrix. So what does this mean? It means perhaps there's a deeper call than simply getting another to agree with us. And the deeper call is to uphold the preciousness and dignity of another with whom we disagree by moving in connection to uphold the wholeness and integrity of their person. The denomination that we're a part of here at Way Collective, where we have standing, is called the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And their identity statement is that we are a movement for wholeness in a fragmented world. But to actually become something like that movement, we can't simply say it or even just believe it. We have to commit to finding ways to living it out. We have to begin to see the world this way, namely as an opportunity for deepening unity rather than continued fragmentation. And then we have to get busy doing it. This past weekend, I was privileged to participate in an interfaith dialogue up at the Empathy Center here in Santa Barbara on the International Day of Peace. And it was a beautiful time of getting to be in conversation with 16 other local leaders from various faith traditions about how we can find common ground. And during our time, one of my colleagues brought up this quote by Valerie Carr that I want to share with you. It says this: "Can you see everyone around you as a part of you that you do not yet know? Can you see sisters and brothers and kin in every face that you see? Can you see other people's children as your own?" I love that idea. Can you see everyone around you as a part of you, and a part of you that you do not yet know? She calls this seeing no stranger. How can we find a part of ourselves in a difficult other as an inroad to connecting with them? About a month ago, we talked about how our shadows are often these repressed emotions that we then project on others with whom we are disgusted. And yet the reality or the invitation of the shadow is to embody that part of us that we have repressed. And so in the context of tonight's conversation, that might mean that we must recognize that quite literally, there is a part of us in a difficult other. And we have to learn to connect with that repressed part of ourselves in another precisely so we can be a part of promoting wholeness and connection rather than further separation and fragmentation. I've always found it funny that we can't see this more clearly. I mean, hello, evolutionary biology and moral psychology, right? That we can't see this more clearly precisely because we are all made up of the same stuff. We all come from Mother Earth. We are all made of carbon forged in dying stars. We are all literally, not figuratively, of this planet. We are made of earth stuff. And that alone should be enough to help us catch a vision of the kind of unity that helps us to understand that we are a part of one another. And some of this might be able to recognize this more readily than others, that we need to begin with an experience of oneness or unity if we are to be a part of being a movement for wholeness. But then, questions arise of, well, how do we actually live in love? And how can we begin not only to see others as our own, but to let that seeing guide us in our actions toward one another? Valerie Carr says that love is more than a rush of feeling. We tend to talk about love as something that happens to us. We fall in love. If we think about love as just an emotion, then love is too fickle, sentimental, and too anemic to be a force for justice in the world. And when we think about our strongest relationships in life, these relationships are defined by sustained and practical care. So she says, I began to define love not as a rush of feeling, but as a form of sweet labor, fierce, bloody, imperfect, and life-giving, a choice that we make over and over again. And if love is a sweet labor, then love can be taught, modeled, and practiced. So love is a sweet labor defined by this sustained and practical care. Again, that's very similar to the definition of compassion we talked about in the opening week of these conversations. That definition of moving toward another with a generative and healing presence. Love is a choice that we make every day. It's a choice not to give in to fear, despite the myriad times that we have interactions with folks that might make us feel small or make us feel dismissed or even hurt or injured by another who doesn't see the world from our perspective. And love is revolutionary, Carr says, precisely because it is the choice to enter into labor for others who do not look like us, our opponents who hurt us, and for ourselves. This love becomes all-encompassing, and it reminds me of that scripture from Romans 12 that says, "Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be arrogant, but associate with the lowly, and do not claim to be wiser than you are. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. And if it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all." So the invitation to live peaceably with all is a beautiful but difficult one that can be fraught with tension if we really try to live it out. So what happens when another doesn't return it to us? What happens if we come from this see no stranger perspective, but they see a stranger in us? Well, we have to take stock of our privilege and our agency in any given situation or relationship. We have to be wise about our boundaries. But the beauty of seeing no stranger is that if we come into a difficult interaction with another, grounded in this perspective that there is a part of us in there, then we will have resources if they don't return it our way. We don't have to be indifferent. We don't have to be guarded. But instead, we have to learn to already hold this container for these difficult interactions that is wide enough for them to exist within. Namely, it's that container of that sweet labor of loving commitment. And what we do know is that there will always be new opportunities to choose love, won't there? And I love that those verses say, "so far as it depends on you," because it acknowledges something very significant. Some of this depends on them, doesn't it? But what are we in control of? We are only in control of the "so far as it depends on us" part. So far as it depends on us, we can strive to live peaceably and in harmony. So far as it depends on us, we can turn blessing back upon those who persecute us. So far as it depends on us, we do not have to repay evil when it comes our way. So far as it depends on us, we can choose to see no stranger. And so far as it depends on us, we can commit to the sweet labor of love, recognizing that we are all a part of one another, that we are all connected, and that we may not be able to change another's mind or another's position, but that isn't the call anyways, so we can give that one up. Remember, the goal here is to keep working for continued connection where it is possible, which begins by getting in touch with the emotive and intuitive parts of one another, which is another word for choosing relationship over rightness. And so the call is to do our small part in this slow labor of love in the world, and so far as it depends on us, to give birth to as much unity and as much compassion as is within our power to do so. Let's talk about this. Thanks for listening to this podcast by Way Collective. To keep up with our community, you can subscribe to this podcast, go to www.waycollective.org, or follow us on Instagram at @waycollective. Peace and every good, y'all.